a lot of you have been doing Splunk, which is fine, but I want to show you another thing, which, by the way, is rather close to what you just heard at the lunchtime. This is the attack matrix. This, I saw this a few years ago, and I just gave up. It looked impossible and complicated, all this junk, and I said nobody could ever learn all that. But then my students who were getting jobs in compliance frameworks look like this. Hundreds of things you have to do, and they said, I wish we'd have spent more time really learning that stuff. And then I took a better look at this, and this really is a good list of everything security students ought to know. You ought to know what these are, or at least most of them. And the idea here is to try to make a systematic description of all the steps in an attack. And this should be version 9, and it is. And so you start with reconnaissance, is the idea, trying to map out the network you're attacking, and then you develop some resources, and then you have initial access where somehow you get some ability to do something, like trick somebody into clicking on a link. Then you achieve execution on some machine inside the target network. Then you achieve persistence, which means that even when the machine reboots, you will still have control. Then privilege escalation, to move from a local user to an administrator or perhaps a domain administrator. Defense evasion is avoiding things like antivirus. Credential access, so I like to scroll to the right, here we go. All right, credential access is reaching password hashes or some other credentials to move around the network. You discover things, which is scanning the network to find other servers and devices you might want to attack. And then lateral movement. You move from the original attack point, which is typically like an end user laptop, where they did something like click on a phishing link, and then you want to move to servers and firewalls and database servers and other things. That's lateral movement through the network. Then collecting data, and then connecting to command and control servers so you can control your fleet of compromised devices. And then exfiltration is sneaking data out of the company, which is not easy. Now, we just did that, the boss of the SOC thing, where they actually let the web server make a direct connection out to the internet. And I said that is a nasty, unsanitary thing to do. You're not supposed to let traffic flow in the wrong direction on your network. So typically, once you've done several hops of lateral movement to take over a good server, you cannot get the data off of that server straight back to your command and control server. You have to build an exfiltration path going through other servers to get out. And this is where all of this started in 2010 because of the Aurora attack on Google. China had been hacking American companies for 5 or 6 years, and it was sort of an open secret in the industry that everybody knew China was hacking us, but people didn't talk about it until Google got angry and spilled the beans and said China had been hacking them and explained how, and they got caught on this step. They snuck into Google's network, stayed in there for months, stole all kinds of data, but when they exfiltrated the data, somebody at Google noticed large amounts of data flowing to a Chinese address that was not part of Google. And they said, who is sending all this data to Google? That was the clue, which they then used tools, whatever they used at that time, the way we were using Splunk, although I don't think they had Splunk at that time. They followed log files and other clues to find out what was happening, and they discovered that they had been compromised by Chinese malware and that 30 other companies had been compromised too, because they performed the also illegal action of hacking the command and control server in China and stealing the data back. And I spoke to a Secret Service agent at the time, and I said, wasn't that a crime too? And she said, yes, and we told Google not to do that, but they did it. And then nobody wanted to prosecute them for it. But technically what they did was as illegal as what China did. But when they stole all the data back, they found data from 30 other American companies like Microsoft and Oracle and everybody. And then Google told them that all you guys have been hacked by China and you didn't even notice. Anyway, that's how we got to this world where we're trying to understand these advanced persistent threats. And then there may be other impacts you want to do, like destroying data. Now, not every attacker will do all these steps, and they might not exactly do them in that order, but the point is they're trying to enumerate all the techniques used to accomplish these things. So those things are the tactics. I'm sticking to enterprise here. Yeah, these are the tactics. These are the steps, the major steps of activity, and here they are, and they assigned them numbers. And the earlier version, they had only 12 of these, going from 1 through 11 or 12, and then they added a couple more. So you have reconnaissance and resource development before, and they changed it a bit at the end. That's why they go out of order. So this is the latest version, version 9. And these are the tactics, and each one of them has a whole bunch of techniques. So you're doing reconnaissance to find out about a company you might want to attack, and you could do scanning IP blocks. You could do vulnerability scanning, like that Att&Ck scanner we saw in the Splunk stuff. You could gather information about the hardware, about the people, like employee names, about the domains, and so on. So anyway, this is all just a lot of information, but this turns out to be extremely useful. And now if you look at vulnerability reports or even modern security tools, they will typically give you this number by whatever they find. They will rate, this is trying to enumerate all these types of attacks, and this number is becoming like a standard number to identify a type of attack, and you rate. You can also go to groups and find out the known attackers. For example, like APT3 is going to be a China-based group, which is the China Ministry of State Security. And here they'll tell you the other names people have assigned to this group, and here's their techniques. They use these techniques, and this is part of how you attribute things to a group. You look at what techniques they're doing and see if that group is known to use that technique. And this is not that different than detectives who will find out which criminal gang is doing burglaries or drug smuggling or something. They will see if they're using known techniques associated with this. So anyway, I made, this is totally non-technical, but I think it's important for the students. I'm trying to find some way to make it sort of fun to learn that stuff. So I made some little quizzes where you have to like look up stuff on there and find it in order to find a flag. And so I originally wrote it all for version 7, and I've got it about half updated to version 9. So you go here, and you have a little game. What tactic uses the technique brute force? And here's the tactics. And here's the link to that matrix. You might have to look it up. Brute force, I'm thinking might be credential access. It might be initial access. Maybe initial access? Nope, credential access. I got it wrong. So anyway, I didn't look it up. If I'd looked it up, I might have got it right. So you have to get 5 in a row, and then you'll get a flag. And they're all like that. And so I have a series of them just to the tactics, and then the techniques, I broke them into groups. And then this is actually the older version, version 7, but it's pretty much the same. And so you might want to try some of them and see if you just get practice looking things up, because students should know all the things in that table. All those terms should be fairly familiar. And this is my latest attempt to convince them to sort of make sure you've read what's in that thing and you know basically what's there. I've learned it by just reading the news about famous attacks and threats and seeing these terms until I've heard a lot of them. And down here, there's an attack navigator, which I'm not sure how well this is working. Let me give it a try. I may have to leave and come back or stop and make another video about this, but it looks like it's going to be here. Okay, this is the attack navigator, and what this does is it lets you compare two groups, and there is a help document somewhere. Perhaps this is it. No, unfortunately. Let me see if I can find the help document. This might be it. Good. Okay. The problem is, I think some of these instructions are a little out of date. But the point is, there's about 12 buttons up here, and almost none of them are worth anything. There's only like 2 buttons worth using. So let me try this. Here's Attack Navigator. It shows all these techniques, and here's a layer. So I... layer information. Yeah, okay, just a moment. For this walkthrough, create a layer. Okay, first you select, there, you use the 3rd button to select your group. There, the 3rd button, multi-select. Now I select a group. So if I want to compare, say, APT1 to APT3, I select APT1. Okay, and now, that will highlight techniques in APT1. Now I assign a score. There, the 3rd button from the left and the 3rd button from the right. Those are the only 2 buttons you use. Now you assign a score. There we go. So I give APT1 a score of 1. And now it highlights and puts a color on all the things that APT1 does. Okay, now I create another layer. I create a new layer. Okay. So that is here. I create a new layer just like a spreadsheet. I'm going to, I saw I could rename it here by double clicking. Doesn't seem to be letting me do that. All right. I create a new empty layer. Okay, and now I think now I can call it. This is going to be APT3. And this one, I'd like to, yeah, it's APT1. There we go. All right. Now, in the APT3, somehow I turned it into the wrong kind of 3. All right. Now, I'm going to hit the third button and choose APT3. Threat groups. Here we go. Okay, APT3. I select. All right. Now I'm going to assign a value to that of 2. Okay. So now I have 2 threads. This is the things APT1 does, and this is the thing APT3 does. And I would like to compare those 2 groups, so I create a new tab, and I create a layer from other layers. And what I do is I fill in data here, and let me check my instructions for the format. Right, A plus B. Okay, the first layer is A and the next one is B. So I go to here. Yep, there's the A and the B. So I want it to be A plus B. There. And I think that's all I need for create. Yes, and now I have all the colors. So red is a score of 1. That means APT1 does it. Yellow is a score of 2. That means APT2 does it. And green is a score of 3, which means they both do it. So now I can answer a question like, what collection technique is used by both of these groups? That's the point of this thing. And this is all to help you do things like attribution. So that's how you use the navigator. And there is one of these quizzes where you have to look up things in the navigator and answer questions like this. Which lateral movement technique was used by Dark Comet but not by Zeus Panda? So anyway, that's a bit of practice getting used to the Att&Ck framework, which is extremely important. You'll see it everywhere. It's all over the industry now. And we all got to get familiar with how it works and using these terms and such.